Can I work here? The old woman's voice didn't shake. It didn't beg. It landed in the middle of that room like a stone dropped into still water. Quiet, precise, and impossible to ignore. 100 Hell's Angels stopped breathing. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved, because she wasn't asking for mercy. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was 74 years old, standing alone in the most dangerous room in Nevada, and she was choosing to be there. That moment changed everything. If this story moves you, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this old woman's courage can travel. The morning Margaret Collins decided to walk into the Hells Angels clubhouse. She had already been awake for 4 hours. She hadn't slept well in months, not since the documents disappeared, not since she started counting every withdrawal, every transfer, every number that didn't add up the way it should. She lay in the dark the way old people sometimes do, not restless exactly, but hyper-aware, like her body had decided sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her mind ran columns of figures, dates, account numbers, names, always the same name at the end, Daniel. She got up at 4:30, made herself a cup of instant coffee. The real stuff was too expensive now, and she had learned not to ask herself why, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a mechanical pencil. She wrote down everything she remembered. Again, for the 47th time. She had learned a long time ago that memory is a muscle. You either use it or you lose it. And Margaret Collins had spent 40 years refusing to lose anything. By 6 in the morning, she had filled both sides of 3 pages. By 7, she had eaten half a piece of toast and decided that today was the day. Not because she was brave, not because she had run out of options, but because she had run out of patience. The highway that cuts through Red Valley, Nevada, runs straight as a ruler for 22 miles before it bends south toward nothing in particular. The town itself is what people politely call small. What they really mean is forgotten. The grocery store closes at 7. The diner has been under the same ownership since 1987. There are 3 churches and 1 bar, and on Sunday mornings it is not always clear which one draws the bigger crowd. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat at the far edge of town, back off the main road far enough that you had to know it was there to find it. A long gravel drive, a chain link fence along the property line, old but solid. Several motorcycles parked in a row along the side of the building, each one angled perfectly, the way men angle things when they take pride in what they own. Margaret had driven past that property 100 times in the last decade. She had never once considered stopping. Until now, she parked her 2004 Buick on the gravel with 2 clean movements. She had always been a precise driver, turned off the engine and sat for exactly 90 seconds. She wasn't praying, she wasn't second-guessing, she was calculating, the way she had always calculated, running the variables one more time. What is the worst thing that can happen? She had already lost most of her savings. She had lost control of her own accounts. She had lost 6 months of her life to confusion and self-doubt that didn't belong to her. She had sat across kitchen tables from lawyers who spoke to her slowly, as if her age were a hearing problem. She had watched her nephew smile at her with that particular expression, patient, performatively patient. The smile of someone who has decided you are a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. The worst thing that could happen in that clubhouse was that they would ask her to leave. She had survived worse than that. She picked up her handbag, old brown leather, worn smooth at the handles, heavy with papers she never went anywhere without, and she got out of the car. So, the door to the clubhouse was unlocked. She found out later that it was always unlocked during the day. The Hells Angels of Red Valley operated on the principle that anyone foolish enough to walk through their door uninvited had already made their own choices and would live, or not, with the consequences. Margaret walked in. The room was large, low ceiling, the smell of motor oil and old coffee and something else she couldn't identify, something layered and permanent. The smell of a space that has been lived in intensely for a very long time. A long bar ran along the left wall, tables and chairs, mismatched, scattered across the floor. A few pool tables in the back, photographs covering nearly every inch of the walls, men on motorcycles, men at rallies, men standing in front of impossible landscapes, all of them squinting at the camera with the particular look of people who do not particularly care whether you find them interesting. There were roughly 40 men in the room when she walked in. Not 100, that number would come later. But enough to stop everything when the door opened. Enough to turn almost in unison and stare. The silence was immediate and total. Margaret stood in the doorway for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't smile apologetically. She held her handbag in both hands at her waist, the way she had held it for 50 years, and she looked for the person who appeared to be in charge. She found him almost immediately. I was standing near the bar, a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a gray beard trimmed close and dark eyes that had the quality of stillness that comes from having reacted to a great many surprising things and choosing, over time, to react to fewer of them. He was wearing a vest covered in patches, and the way the other men had arranged themselves, unconsciously, naturally, told her everything she needed to know about where the gravity in that room was centered. She walked toward him. The room stayed silent. She could feel every eye tracking her movement. She heard someone, somewhere near the back, exhale slowly through their nose. She stopped 4 feet from the man by the bar. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was even, not loud, not soft. The voice of someone who had run meetings. "My name is Margaret Collins. I'm looking for work. I thought you might be able to use someone with my background." The man studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, how did you even know where we were?" "Phone book," she said, "and I asked at the diner." Somebody behind her made a sound that was almost a laugh and then thought better of it. The man with the gray beard looked at her for another long moment. Then he pulled out a chair from the nearest table, not ceremoniously, just practically, and set it down in front of her. "Sit down," he said. "I'm Caleb Walker. What kind of work are you talking about?" His full name was Caleb Thomas Walker, and he had been the chapter president for 11 years. Before that, he had been road captain, sergeant at arms, and before all of that, he had been a 22-year-old from Flagstaff who had walked away from a community college accounting program with 47 credit hours and a strong instinct that the life people expected him to lead was not the one he intended to live. I was 55 years old. He had 3 adult children who called him on birthdays and holidays and sometimes in between, and he was quietly proud of that, though he would not have said so in that room. He had a reputation for fairness that was more valuable in his world than a reputation for toughness, though he had that too. He had never in his life expected to be sitting across a table from a 74-year-old woman at 8:30 in the morning. He folded his hands on the table and waited. "Financial management," Margaret said. She set her handbag on the table and opened it. She removed a manila envelope and placed it on the table between them, but she didn't open it yet. "I spent 40 years as a financial manager for Consolidated Western Manufacturing. I handled accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll, tax compliance, and internal auditing. When I retired, I was managing a department of 14 people and overseeing approximately $47 million in annual transactions." Caleb's expression didn't change. "And you want to do that for us?" "I want to work," Margaret said. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking for sympathy. I've heard that organizations like yours sometimes have," she paused, choosing the word precisely, "documentation challenges. I solve documentation challenges." "Organizations like ours," Caleb repeated. "I'm not naive, Mr. Walker," she said. "I know what this is. I know what you are. I'm not here to judge that. I'm here because I need a place to work, and I have reason to believe that you need someone with my skills." She paused. "The IRS doesn't care how big your motorcycle is." The room was still silent. Then a man somewhere behind Margaret. She found out later his name was Hector, and that he was the chapter's treasurer, and that he had been dealing with a shoebox of receipts in a spreadsheet he had built himself from a YouTube tutorial, said quietly, "Caleb." Just that, just his name. Caleb looked past Margaret at Hector. Then he looked back at Margaret. "You said you need a place to work," he said. "That's a specific word choice. Not that you're looking for work, that you need a place." Margaret met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "Why here?" She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer deserved more than a quick response. "Because," she finally said, "I need somewhere that nobody is going to decide I'm too old to be useful before I have a chance to show them I'm not. And I don't think that's going to be a problem here." Caleb said nothing for several seconds. What makes you think that? He asked. Because, she said, the men in this room are used to being judged before anyone finds out who they actually are. I thought that might make you more careful about doing the same thing to someone else. Another silence. This one felt different. They gave her a desk in the back office. It was technically a storage room that had been hosting a desk for 15 years without anyone doing much more than stacking things on it. It had a folding chair that wobbled on the left rear leg, a window that looked out at the parking lot, and a filing cabinet so overfull that the top drawer no longer closed completely. Margaret stood in the doorway and looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then she went back to the bar, found a roll of paper towels and a bottle of spray cleaner under the sink, and went back to the office and started cleaning. Nobody helped her. Nobody hindered her either. The men who passed by the doorway slowed down to look. Some of them stopped entirely, leaning against the doorframe for a moment, watching this elderly woman in a beige cardigan systematically remove every object from the desk, wipe the surface down in careful strokes, and begin organizing the chaos into something that resembled intention. A young man named Darius, 26, large, quiet, with a cautious intelligence in his eyes that he had learned not to display too obviously, eventually materialized in the doorway with a can of WD-40. For the cabinet drawer, he said. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses, which she had produced from her handbag along with several other things that now sat in a precise row along the windowsill, 2 mechanical pencils, a yellow legal pad, a small calculator, a magnifying glass, and a bottle of ibuprofen. Thank you, she said. She meant it. He handed her the WD-40 and leaned against the doorframe, watching. You really worked for a manufacturing company? He asked. 40 years, she said, opening the filing cabinet carefully, assessing the contents with a rapid, practiced eye. Started when I was 32, retired at 72. You worked until you were 72? Tried to work after that, she said. People made it difficult. He was quiet for a moment. How'd you end up here? She looked at him directly. He was young enough to be her grandson, and he had the look of someone who had gotten used to not asking too many questions. She decided he deserved a real answer. I made the mistake, she said carefully, of trusting someone I loved more than I trusted myself. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded slowly, the way young people nod when something resonates with an experience they don't yet have words for. I get that, he said quietly. Yes, she said, I imagine you do. By noon, she had created a preliminary organizational system for the filing cabinet. By 2 o'clock, she had reviewed 6 months of receipts and identified 3 separate categories of documentation problems. By 4 o'clock, Hector was sitting across from her at the now cleared desk, listening to her explain what she had found in a tone that was matter-of-fact rather than alarming. The tone of a professional who delivers bad news the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, clearly, without drama, with a clear path forward. You've been operating without a consistent expense categorization system, she told him, which means that every quarterly report you've filed for the last 3 years has a different internal logic. That's not necessarily illegal, but it's the kind of inconsistency that draws attention. You also have 11 months of vendor receipts that haven't been reconciled against your payment records, which means you either overpaid or underpaid several accounts and you don't know which. Hector, who was 38 and had been treasurer for 2 years and had spent most of those 2 years anxious about exactly these things but without the vocabulary to describe them, stared at her. Can you fix it? He said. Yes, she said. I'll need full access to your digital records, and I'll need someone to bring me the secondary files. I can see there's a second cabinet somewhere because there are references in here to document series that don't exist in this room. Storage unit, Hector said. I'll need access to that too, she said, and I need a real chair. This one wobbles. Within 45 minutes, someone had brought her a proper office chair. It had a small rip in the fabric on the left armrest, but it didn't wobble, and she found it entirely acceptable. The first full week was what people would later describe, trying to explain how it happened, as simply impossible to ignore. It wasn't that Margaret announced herself. She didn't hold meetings. She didn't give speeches. She didn't ask anyone to change how they operated or to alter the rhythms of the clubhouse that had been established over years. She simply worked. 12-hour days, methodical, quiet, focused. She arrived before 8 and was usually still at her desk when dinner appeared. Someone started leaving food outside her door around day 3, and she never found out exactly who initiated that practice. But she ate what was left and left the plate or container in the hallway, and it was always gone in the morning. By the end of the first week, she had reconstructed 18 months of financial records. She had created a master reconciliation document that showed for the first time exactly what the chapter had spent, where, on what, and what remained unaccounted for. She had flagged 7 potential compliance issues and proposed straightforward solutions for each. She had also learned the names of 43 people, their roles, and several personal details. She filed away the way she filed everything, carefully, with the understanding that information properly stored was information that remained useful. On Friday afternoon, she printed out a clean summary document and walked it to Caleb's office. He read it without speaking. She waited. When he finished, he set it down on his desk and looked at her. "How much do you want?" he asked. "For what?" she said. "To keep doing this." She considered. "What are you currently paying for financial services?" he told her. She considered again. "I'll do it for that amount, but I want health insurance included, and I need a parking spot close to the door. My hip has been difficult lately, and I don't like walking on gravel in poor light." "Done," he said. She nodded. "Good." She turned to leave. "Margaret," he said. She paused. "Why did you really come here?" he said. "And don't tell me it was the phone book." She turned back. She stood in his office doorway the way she had stood in the clubhouse doorway on Monday morning, steady, deliberate, taking up exactly the space she was entitled to. "I told you," she said, "I needed a place where I wouldn't be dismissed." "That's part of it," he said. "What's the rest?" She was quiet for a moment. "There's something I need to find," she said. "And I believe the trail that leads to it starts in financial records. I needed a legitimate reason to be surrounded by financial records without raising suspicion." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "Whose records?" he said. "Mine," she said, "but not just mine. Someone has been moving money through a complicated chain of accounts, and some of those accounts connect to businesses in this part of Nevada. And I believe," she paused, precise as always, "I believe that if I do my job here long enough and well enough, I will eventually see something that confirms what I already suspect." "What do you already suspect?" he said. She met his eyes. "That the person who convinced everyone I was too old to manage my own life," she said quietly, "has been stealing from me for at least 3 years, and that he has been very careful, and that he made one mistake." "What mistake?" said Caleb. "He underestimated me," said Margaret. "They always do." That night, Caleb told 2 people what she had said. Both of them, independently, said the same thing. Keep her. By the following Monday, something had shifted in the clubhouse. It was hard to name exactly what it was. It was not that people suddenly loved her. It was not that their world had transformed. It was more like a change in atmospheric pressure, the kind you feel in your ears before a storm, the sense that conditions had altered in a way that had not yet fully arrived. The men who had barely spoken to her in the first week began stopping at her office door. Not for long, a sentence or two, asking if she needed anything, sometimes asking about something they had heard she knew. Taxes, usually. Deductions. The right way to report something. She answered every question directly and without condescension. She never made anyone feel foolish for asking. She noticed that this was unusual for them. She noticed the faint surprise on each face when she simply answered, without pause, without the performance of patience that people sometimes deployed to disguise contempt. She had been condescended to herself recently enough to know exactly how it felt. She had no interest in doing it to anyone else. Darius became her unofficial office assistant. This was not a formal arrangement. It evolved in the way that most useful arrangements evolve, through repeated small gestures that gradually accumulated into something recognized as pattern. He brought her coffee in the morning without being asked. She drank it. He asked questions, and she answered them. Real questions, not the polite surface-level conversation of someone performing friendliness, but actual questions, the kind that came from a person who was genuinely trying to understand things. He asked her one afternoon during the second week how she had gotten so good at reading numbers. "Practice," she said. 40 years of it. "But how did you start?" he pressed. "What made you want to do it in the first place?" She looked at him. He had a specific kind of earnestness that reminded her of her late husband in the early years, before time had taught him to wear his curiosity more carefully. My father was terrible with money, she said. Not dishonest, just careless. When I was 17, he lost 2 months of savings to a business arrangement that anyone with basic accounting knowledge would have recognized as a fraud. We didn't lose the house, but it was close. I decided after that I was going to understand money. I was going to understand it the way a mechanic understands an engine. Every piece of it, exactly what it does, exactly what happens when it's missing. She paused. Knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you. Darius was quiet for a moment. Somebody took something from you, he said. Not as an accusation, as an observation from someone paying close attention. They tried, she said. They took the money. They didn't take the knowledge of where it went. He nodded slowly. Is that why you're here? He asked. She looked at him over her glasses. I'm here, she said, because I'm the best person for this job, and because I need this job, and because sometimes the right road and the useful road are the same road. He thought about that. That's a yes, he decided. That's a yes, she agreed. On the 18th day, she found the first thread. It was in an old invoice, a contract for repair services from a company called Desert Southwest Solutions. The invoice itself was unremarkable. What caught her eye was the routing number on the payment record. She had seen that routing number before, not in the clubhouse records. In her own, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she opened the secondary ledger she had been maintaining. Private, handwritten, locked in the drawer of her office, the key on a chain around her neck. And she checked the number against her own records. It matched. She wrote the match in her private ledger, underlined it twice. Then she continued working as if nothing had happened. Her hands were completely steady. That evening, when most of the clubhouse had moved into the bar area, and the noise level had risen to its usual comfortable evening level, Margaret walked to Caleb's office and knocked on the open door. He looked up. I need to ask you something, she said. Come in, he said. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The chair had improved since her first visit. Someone had put a cushion on it, and she had never mentioned this to anyone. And she placed her hands in her lap. Desert Southwest Solutions, she said. What do you know about them? Caleb's expression slightly, quickly, but she caught it. Why, he said. They've done work for you, she said. 3 jobs in the last 2 years. But the company registered address is a mail forwarding service in Reno, and the routing number on their payment records matches a routing number I've seen before, in a personal context. Caleb was quiet. How personal, he said. She met his eyes. My family, she said. The word landed in the room and sat there. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Tell me, he said, everything. And for the first time in 18 months, Margaret Collins told someone the whole truth. Not the version she had practiced, not the simplified version she had prepared for lawyers, for officials, for the slow-spoken people who looked at her age before they looked at her evidence. The full version, complete, with every number, every date, every name, every transaction she had memorized across 47 nights of lying awake, running columns in the dark. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was very quiet. He said, How long have you been building this? Since I realized what was happening, she said, about 14 months ago. And you came here to finish it. I came here, she said, because I needed to be close to the records, and because I needed to be somewhere where my competence would be judged on evidence rather than on assumption. He looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he said something that she had not expected. We're going to help you. She looked at him. I don't need protection, she said immediately. I know, he said. I'm not offering protection. I'm offering resources, access. People know how to find information through channels that lawyers and officials can't always use. She considered this. I need to be the one who builds the case, she said. My way, by the book, everything admissible. Understood, he said. And I need to be the one who presents it, she said. Must someone else, not on my behalf, me. Understood, he said again. She nodded once. Then we have an arrangement, she said. She stood, picked up her handbag, and walked to the door. Margaret, Caleb said. She paused. What he did to you, Caleb said. His voice had changed slightly. quieter, with something underneath it that was not quite anger, but was related to anger in the way that bedrock is related to earthquake. Taking advantage of someone you trusted, making them doubt themselves, taking their voice away from them. He paused. I want you to know, that is the thing in this world that I have the least patience for. She stood in the doorway. I know, she said. That's one of the reasons I walk through that door. She left. Caleb sat in his empty office for a long time, looking at the wall. Then he picked up his phone and made 3 calls. The third one lasted 40 minutes. By morning, 4 people knew what Margaret Collins was building, and every single one of them said the same thing, independent of the others, without consultation. Let her finish it. Don't get in her way, and make sure nobody else does either.
5 minutes.
Outside in the parking lot, Margaret sat in her Buick for 7 minutes before starting the engine. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and her eyes on the dash, and her mind running the same column of numbers she had been running for 14 months. She had found the first thread. She knew what came next. She started the car and drove home through the desert dark. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not lie awake running numbers. She slept deeply, completely. The sleep of someone who has finally chosen the battlefield on which she intends to win. What none of them knew yet, not Caleb, not Darius, not any of the 40 men who had watched a 74-year-old woman walk in and refuse to leave, was that the thread she had found was only the beginning, and that what she was about to uncover would not just expose one man's betrayal. It would change the course of everything. The morning after Margaret told Caleb everything, she arrived at the clubhouse at 7:45 and found a fresh pot of coffee already made and a new legal pad sitting on her desk. Nobody claimed responsibility for either. She poured herself a cup, sat down, and opened the private ledger she kept on the chain around her neck. She read through her own notes the way a surgeon reviews an X-ray before operating, not to discover something new, but to confirm what she already knew before she made the first cut. Desert Southwest Solutions. Routing number ending in 4471. 3 payments from the clubhouse accounts. Total $62,000 over 22 months. The same routing number appeared in her personal banking records 11 times over 3 years. Transfers ranging from $4,000 to $31,000, always from accounts that Daniel had convinced her to consolidate under his oversight, always to destinations she had never been shown, always with her signature on the authorization forms, signatures she had signed without reading, because Daniel had told her the documents were routine, and because for a brief, terrible period of her life, she had believed him. She closed the ledger. She picked up her coffee. She began to work. The thing about following a financial trail is that it requires a specific kind of patience that most people do not have. It is not the patience of waiting. It is the patience of looking, of reading the same document 17 times because you know the answer is in it and you simply have not found the right angle yet. Of holding 2 numbers in your mind simultaneously across weeks of other work, keeping them active in the background like a program running underneath everything else, waiting for the moment they connect to a third number that makes the picture suddenly completely clear. Margaret had this patience in abundance. She had been developing it since she was 17 years old, sitting at her father's kitchen table, going through 2 months of bank statements line by line, teaching herself to find the place where the money had gone. She found it then. She would find it now. The question was how deep it went. She was beginning to suspect the answer was deeper than she had originally allowed herself to believe. By 10 in the morning, Hector had come by twice, once to drop off a folder of vendor contracts she had requested, once to ask a question about a depreciation schedule that took 4 minutes to answer, and left him looking faintly stunned in the way people look when a concept they have been vaguely afraid of suddenly becomes simple. He thanked her each time with a sincerity that was slightly awkward and entirely genuine, and she found she appreciated the awkwardness more than a polished thank you would have given her. At 10:30, a man she hadn't spoken to before appeared in her doorway. I was older than most of the others, mid-60s, she estimated, lean, with the kind of weathered stillness that comes from a life spent paying close attention. He went by Rook. She found out later that his real name was Raymond Castellano, and that he had spent 22 years doing work she was not specifically told about, and that his opinion in the clubhouse carried a particular weight that didn't announce itself but was simply present, the way load-bearing walls are present in a building. "You're the woman Caleb told me about," Rook said from the doorway. "I imagine so," Margaret said. She did not look up from the document she was annotating. "Are you going to come in or stand there?" A pause. Then he came and sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited, which she interpreted correctly as a sign of respect rather than presumption. He was treating her office as an office, which meant he was treating her as someone who ran it. "Caleb says you found a connection between your personal accounts and a company we've done business with," Rook said. "That's correct," she said. "How confident are you?" She looked up then. She met his eyes directly and held them. "The routing number is an exact match," she said. "I verified it against 3 separate documents from 2 different source systems. I'm not guessing, I'm not inferring. The money moved through the same account." Rook looked at her for a moment. "Desert Southwest Solutions." "Yes. We use them for 3 jobs," he said. "Structural repair, electrical work, and site preparation, hired through a referral." "Whose referral?" she said. Rook was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll find out." "That would be helpful," she said. He stood. He was nearly at the door when she said, "Mr. Castellano." He stopped, turned. She had used his real name deliberately. She watched him register it. "I'm not trying to create problems for anyone here," she said. "The connection I found may be coincidental. Companies share routing numbers through shared banking institutions. I have to follow the evidence where it goes. If it leads somewhere uncomfortable, I need to know that you understand that's where it's going to go." Rook looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said, "in my experience, the truth is almost always uncomfortable. That's how you know it's the truth and not something somebody put together to make you feel better." He paused. "Follow it where it goes. We'll deal with what's at the end." He left. Margaret turned back to her documents. She wrote 1 word in the margin of her legal pad: referral. Then she circled it twice and drew a line from it to the routing number at the top of the page. She had been in the clubhouse for 18 days. She had found the first thread on day 18. And now, on day 19, the thread was already pulling tighter. She knew this feeling. She had felt it in every audit she had ever conducted, every reconciliation, every forensic review. The moment when the random scatter of numbers stops looking like noise and starts resolving into pattern. The pattern was beginning. She needed to be ready for what it showed her. Because part of her, the part that had loved Daniel since he was 7 years old and following her around her kitchen, asking questions about everything, part of her was still hoping she was wrong. She knew she wasn't, but she gave that part of herself the morning to hope. By afternoon, she got back to work. Darius showed up at 11 with a sandwich she hadn't asked for, turkey, no mustard, which was correct, and she hadn't told him her preference, which meant he had paid attention to something she said in passing without realizing she was being observed, which was a quality she recognized and respected. "Rook came by," Darius said, leaning against the doorframe in the easy way he had that managed to be casual without being disrespectful. "He did," she said. "He doesn't come by for just anyone," Darius said. "People in this house have been trying to get his attention on various things for years." She looked at him. "Is that significant?" "It means he thinks what you're doing matters," Darius said, "which means most of the people in this house are going to think it matters too." "I see," she said. She looked back at her documents. "Then I'd better make sure it does." Darius was quiet for a moment. She had learned that his silences were thoughtful rather than empty. He was processing, not absent. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," she said. "I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair," he said. "The person who did this to you, is it someone in your family?" She set her pencil down. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That's the worst kind," he said, not as a platitude, as a statement of fact from someone who knew something about the subject. "It is," she said. "Because you keep wanting to be wrong," he said. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she looked at a document she was reading carefully. "How old are you?" she said. 26. "You're 26 and you already know that." He shrugged, a slight movement that contained a great deal of information she filed away for later. "I've had some experience," he said. "I'm sorry," she said, simply, without performance. He nodded. Me too, he said, for you. They sat in that for a moment, two people on opposite ends of a lifetime, sharing the same specific grief. Then Margaret picked up her pencil and said, "The sandwich is getting cold." "Right," he said. He left the sandwich on the edge of the desk and pushed off the door frame and went. She ate it. It was good. She made a note to tell him so tomorrow because she believed in acknowledging things that deserved acknowledgement. And because she suspected that in his life, acknowledgement had been in shorter supply than it should have been. By 2 o'clock, she had finished the preliminary cross-reference analysis she had been building since day one. It was 43 pages, handwritten in her precise small script, organized into 7 categories. It documented every financial irregularity she had found in the clubhouse records, alongside the parallel irregularities in her own financial history. The overlap was not subtle. It was not circumstantial. It was a pattern so consistent that it had a shape, and the shape pointed in one direction. She read through the completed document once, twice. She checked her arithmetic on 14 separate calculations. Every number held. Then she put the document in a fresh manila envelope, sealed it, wrote her initials across the seal, and locked it in the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet. She needed one more piece, the referral, who had recommended Desert Southwest Solutions to the clubhouse. If the answer was who she thought it was, then the circle closed. And a closed circle was evidence, not theory. She needed the circle to close. She needed it to close in a way that a court would understand, not just a room full of bikers, not just her own certain knowledge. She needed paper. She needed a traceable chain. She needed the kind of proof that left no room for anyone to look at a 74-year-old woman and say, with that particular tone, "Are you sure you understood what you were looking at?" She had heard that tone. She was done hearing it. She was going to make sure nobody could use it again. Rook came back at 4 o'clock. He sat down in the chair without ceremony and said, "The referral came through a property management contact. Someone who approached us about 18 months ago with a business proposal. Didn't go anywhere, but during those conversations, they mentioned a contractor they'd worked with, Desert Southwest Solutions." Margaret's hand was perfectly still on her legal pad. "Did they give a name?" she said. "Daniel Collins," Rook said. The room was very quiet. Rook watched her face. He was watching for collapse, she understood. Watching to see if the confirmation broke something in her, the way confirmations like this sometimes broke people. The moment when hoping you're wrong gives way to knowing you're not. Her face didn't change. Because she had spent 14 months preparing for this moment, and she had made herself a promise, when the confirmation came, she would not fall apart. She would not have the grief. She would have the grief later, in private, in the specific and necessary way she had learned to schedule difficult feelings so that they did not interfere with the work. "Thank you," she said. Rook looked at her. "You're not surprised." "No," she said, "but now I have corroboration from an independent source." She paused. "Did Daniel Collins know when he made the referral that he was recommending a company to an organization that had business connections to my accounts?" "Ounce?" Rook's eyes sharpened. "You think he knew you were here?" "I think," she said carefully, "that it's possible he knew before I did that the routing number appeared in both places. And I think it's worth considering whether the referral was an accident or a test, to see whether anyone would notice the connection." Rook was quiet for several seconds. He was testing whether the clubhouse had anyone who could read its own financial records. Rook said slowly. "He was assessing his exposure," Margaret said. "Yes. And then you walked through the door." "And then I walked through the door," she agreed. Rook looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that she couldn't entirely name. It was part respect and part something older, more complicated. The look of a man who has seen a great deal and is recalibrating what category to put something in. "He doesn't know you're here," Rook said. It was not a question. "Not yet," she said. "When he finds out, he'll come," she said. "In my experience, people who believe they are in control do not respond well to discovering they've lost it. He'll come, and he'll be angry, and he'll be certain he can manage the situation the way he's been managing it for 3 years. She paused. "He'll be wrong." Rook stood. He put both hands flat on the edge of her desk for a moment, a gesture she interpreted as something between a salute and a promise, and then he straightened. I'm going to make some calls, he said. There are people I know who can verify the company registration records independently, off the official channels. I need everything to be usable in court, she said immediately. What I find will tell you where to look, he said. What you do with it will be yours. She thought about this. Acceptable, she said. He nodded once and left. Margaret turned back to her desk and sat for a moment with her hands folded, not writing, not calculating, just sitting. Daniel Collins was 51 years old. She had known him since the day he was born. She had been at the hospital when his mother, her sister Barbara, gone now 8 years, had delivered him 2 weeks early in a tremendous hurry to exist, which had remained characteristic of him for the rest of his life. She had bought him his first bicycle. She had helped pay for his college. When his first marriage ended, badly, she had sat across a restaurant table from him for 3 hours and listened to everything he needed to say. And she had not judged him, and she had not told anyone else what he told her. She had trusted him absolutely, not because she was naive, but because she had watched him grow up and she had genuinely, completely believed that she knew who he was. She had been wrong in a way she was still, at some level, finding the full dimensions of. The grief of it was not rage. It was not betrayal in the sharp, hot sense. It was something quieter and more devastating. The grief of discovering that a relationship you believed was real had been, at least in part, a long performance. That the person sitting across that restaurant table listening to her had already, by that point, begun moving her money. She allowed herself 45 seconds of that grief. Then she picked up her pencil and got back to work. Caleb appeared in her doorway at 5:30. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, the real kind, she could smell it, not the instant she kept in her desk. And he set one on the corner of her desk and sat down in the chair with the easy authority of someone who has decided to be present somewhere and is not asking permission. Rook told me, he said. I assumed he would, she said. Daniel Collins referred us to that company. Yes. And you think he knew the accounts were linked? I think there's a reasonable probability, she said. I can't prove intent from what I have now. I can prove the financial connections. Intent is for the investigators to establish. Caleb wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He had large hands, scarred across the knuckles in the way that told a story he probably didn't tell out loud. He looked at her with an expression that she was learning to read. It was the expression of a man who was deciding how honest to be. This is going to get complicated, he said. It's already complicated, she said. More complicated, he said. When Daniel Collins finds out you're here, and he will find out because these things always get out, he's not going to come in quietly. He's going to come in with lawyers and noise. And the argument that you're an old woman who's confused and has attached herself to dangerous people. I know, she said. And some of that will stick, Caleb said, because people look at where you are and they make decisions about what kind of person you must be. She looked at him steadily. Is that what you did when I walked in? He was quiet for a moment. For about 30 seconds, he said, and then you started talking. Then I have 30 seconds to work with, she said. I'll manage. He almost smiled. Not quite. I want to tell you something, he said. He set his coffee cup down. He leaned forward slightly. I've been in a lot of situations where someone needed help and came to us because they had no other options. And I've seen it go badly, and I've seen it go well. And the difference was usually whether the person who came to us had a clear head and knew what they were doing. And, she said, you have the clearest head I have ever seen on anyone in any situation I have ever been in, he said. And I've been in some situations. She looked at him. I appreciate that, she said, but I want to be clear about something too. She set her coffee down. I didn't come here to become part of this organization. I came here to do a job and to use the proximity to financial records to complete something I've been working on for 14 months. When that's done, I intend to leave with everything properly documented and handed off, and I intend to get my life back. Understood, he said. But, she said, he raised his eyes. But, she continued, I also want to be clear that what I've seen here in 3 weeks is not what I expected to see. And I am not leaving with a lower opinion of the people in this building than I arrived with. I arrived with no opinion, and I am leaving eventually with a specific one. Good or bad, he said. Complicated, she said, which in my experience is the only honest answer for anything that actually matters. He picked up his coffee. Fair enough, he said. They drank their coffee in a silence that had stopped being awkward 3 weeks ago. Then Caleb said, "There's something you should know." Something in his tone changed. She set her cup down. "Daniel Collins isn't just a name in our referral records," Caleb said. "I made some calls last night, 3 calls. The third one was a long one." He paused. "His name has come up in a federal investigation. Has come up, past tense. The investigation was closed 14 months ago. Insufficient evidence." Margaret was very still. 14 months ago, she said. "Yes. That's when I started documenting," she said. "I know," said Caleb. She thought about this. She thought about what it meant that a federal investigation had gotten close to Daniel 14 months ago and found insufficient evidence. She thought about what kind of person responds to a federal investigation by immediately redoubling their efforts to control and discredit the person most likely to produce that evidence. She thought about the document she had signed 6 months before she started documenting, giving Daniel power of attorney over her primary accounts. The document, he had told her, was routine. He knew, she said quietly, not to Caleb, to the air, working it out. He knew the investigation was coming, or he knew it had started, and he accelerated the consolidation of my accounts because he needed more insulation. More layers between himself and the money. More signatures that weren't his. She looked at Caleb. "He wasn't just stealing from me," she said. "He was using me." The word had a different weight than she expected. It sat in her chest differently than stealing had sat. Stealing was a crime. Using was something else, something that required knowing her, knowing what she would sign, knowing how much she trusted him. It required intimacy, real intimacy, earned over decades. She had given him that, and he had turned it into a tool. "Margaret," Caleb said. His voice was careful. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. "No," she said honestly. "But I don't need to be all right to finish this. I just need to be clear-headed. And I am." "Okay," he said. He didn't push. She appreciated that more than she could have explained in that moment. She picked up her pencil. "I need the name of the federal investigator who closed the case," she said. "And I need it in a way that I can approach them directly, officially, as myself." "I can get that," he said. "And I need access to any business records Desert Southwest Solutions left behind when they dealt with you. Full records. Everything you have. Hector will get them to you tonight." "Good." She opened the ledger. "Then I have work to do." Caleb stood. He moved toward the door, and she was already writing, the pencil moving in that rapid, precise way it moved when she was thinking faster than she was writing, which was the pace she operated at when she knew she was close. He paused in the doorway. "You said you needed a place where you wouldn't be dismissed," he said. She didn't look up. "I remember." "I want you to know," he said, "that no one in this building is ever going to dismiss you again." The pencil kept moving. "I know," she said. "Now please let me work." He left. She worked until 11 o'clock that night. Darius brought her dinner at 7 and stayed long enough to stack the new folder of Desert Southwest records in a way that made sense to her organizational system. Because he had been watching how she organized things and had learned it without being taught, which was a quality she had always admired in people. At 11:15, she locked her office, put the key in her handbag, and walked to her car. She sat for a moment in the dark parking lot. Then she took out her phone. She looked at Daniel's name in her contacts for a long time. She did not call him. She did not text him. She put the phone back in her bag. She started the car. As she drove home through the Nevada dark, she thought about the federal investigator in the closed case in the 14 months between then and now. She thought about how many times Daniel had sat across from her since then, performing patience, performing concern, helping her with paperwork, managing her accounts, keeping her calm, while the investigation closed and the trail went cold, and he believed he had survived the only threat he would ever face. He hadn't known about Margaret's yellow legal pads. He hadn't known about the private ledger on the chain. He hadn't known that the woman he had decided was too old to manage her own life had spent 14 months doing exactly that, managing it precisely, methodically, building a case document by document, number by number, in the careful and patient ways she had been building things since she was 17 years old. He had made the mistake of confusing quiet with empty. He had made the mistake of confusing age with diminishment. He had made the mistake of looking at a woman who was choosing not to fight loudly and deciding that meant she couldn't fight at all. Margaret pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. She was tired in the deep, honest way she got tired when she had done real work. Her hip ached from the hours in the chair. Her eyes were stiff from the close writing. She felt, underneath all of that, something she recognized from 40 years of professional life. The specific, quiet satisfaction of a person who has looked at a problem clearly, assembled the right tools, and is 3/4 of the way to solving it. Tomorrow she would call the federal investigator. Tomorrow she would start the final phase. Tomorrow she would begin the process of taking back everything that had been taken from her. Not just the money which mattered, but the thing that mattered more, her name, her competence, her voice, the right to be exactly who she had always been. She got out of the car. She went inside. She slept. The federal investigator's name was Sandra Reyes, and she picked up on the second ring. Margaret had not expected that. She had prepared herself for voicemail, for a callback that might take days, for the bureaucratic patience that official channels usually required. Instead, a woman's voice, sharp, alert, the voice of someone who did not waste time on either end of a phone call, said simply, Reyes. My name is Margaret Collins, Margaret said. She was sitting at her desk, her legal pad open, her pencil ready. 14 months ago, a federal investigation touching on the financial activities of a Daniel Collins was closed due to insufficient evidence. I believe I have the evidence that was missing. I'd like to discuss that with you. Silence on the line. Not the silence of someone caught off guard, the silence of someone thinking rapidly. How did you get this number? Reyes said. Through a source I'd prefer not to name at this stage, Margaret said. But I can tell you that the information I have is documented, organized, and cross-referenced across 3 independent financial systems. I'm a former financial manager with 40 years of experience. I'm not a confused citizen with a suspicion. I have a case. Another pause. Shorter this time. Where are you? Reyes said. Red Valley, Nevada. I can be there Thursday, Reyes said. Is that acceptable? Margaret looked at her calendar. Thursday is fine. Come to the address I'm going to give you, not my home address, a business address. She gave Reyes the address of the clubhouse. There was a third pause, longer than the others. Mr. Collins, Reyes said carefully, are you aware of what kind of establishment that address belongs to? Yes, Margaret said. I work there. It's where my documents are. It's where I'll be on Thursday. Is that a problem? A beat. No, Reyes said slowly. I've interviewed people in stranger places. Good, Margaret said. 9 o'clock. Bring someone who understands forensic accounting. She hung up before Reyes could ask another question. She set the phone down on her desk and exhaled. A controlled, deliberate breath. The kind that releases exactly as much as it's supposed to and no more. Her hands were steady. Her mind was running faster than it had run in weeks. Thursday was 4 days away. She had 4 days to finish building what she was going to put in front of Sandra Reyes, and it needed to be the cleanest, tightest, most irrefutable document she had ever produced in 40 years of producing documents that were supposed to be irrefutable. She picked up her pencil and started. Darius appeared at her door at 9:15. Caleb wants to know if you told the feds to come here, he said. Tell Caleb yes, she said without looking up. He's going to want to talk to you about that. He knows where my office is, she said. Caleb appeared 11 minutes later, which was faster than she expected, and she revised upward her estimate of how unsettled he was. You gave them our address, he said from the doorway. I need a secure location with full access to my documents, she said. This is where my documents are. Margaret, Mr. Walker. She set her pencil down and looked at him directly. The investigator who's coming on Thursday is interested in Daniel Collins, not in this organization. If I had documentation implicating anyone here in anything, I would have told you before I made that call. I don't. The investigation is about him, the company he used, and the money trail connecting them to my accounts. She paused. You told me no one in this building would dismiss me. I need you to now demonstrate that by trusting me. The room was quiet. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, if this goes sideways, it won't, she said. But if it does, it won't, she said again. Not reassurance. Statement of fact. I have not built a case for 14 months to have it go sideways 4 days before the end. Now please let me work. He looked at her for another moment. Something shifted in his face. It was not surrender, it was recognition. The recognition of someone who has assessed another person's competence and arrived at a conclusion. Thursday, he said. 9 o'clock, she confirmed. He left. She picked up her pencil. The next 4 days moved in the particular way time moves when you are inside something important. Not fast, not slow, but dense. Every hour had the weight of 3. She worked in long, concentrated stretches, broken by the small, practical interruptions of human life. Coffee, food, the occasional human appearing in her doorway. Rook stopped by on Tuesday evening with a single sheet of paper. He set it on her desk without explanation. She looked at it. It was a printout of a Nevada Secretary of State business registration record for Desert Southwest Solutions, with 2 fields highlighted in yellow, the registered agent name and the registration date. The registered agent was a law firm. The registration date was 11 days after the federal investigation into Daniel Collins had been opened. She looked up at Rook. He created the company as a response to the investigation, she said. That's what it looks like, Rook said. He needed a clean-looking contractor to move money through, something that had a paper trail of legitimate work. Your jobs gave him that. He could show money flowing to a company that had actual invoices, actual work performed, actual signatures from a real organization. She paused. He used your credibility as insulation. Rook was quiet for a moment. He used us. I used both of us, Margaret said. Something moved across Rook's face. It was controlled, but it was there. A specific, cold kind of anger that didn't express itself loudly because it didn't need to. Thursday, he said, it was not a question, it was a statement of intent. Thursday, she confirmed. He took the paper back. His copy, she understood. She had already photographed it with her phone and sent it to her own email, and left. Wednesday night, Margaret went home at 7, which was early for her. She ate a proper dinner. She checked through her complete documentation one final time, sitting at her kitchen table with a red pen marking anything that needed clarification. She found 3 items. She resolved them with additional notation. She finished at 10:30. Then she did something she had not done in 14 months. She took out a photograph. It was from Barbara's birthday, her sister's 45th, a dinner at a restaurant in Phoenix, the last birthday Barbara had before the cancer diagnosis that moved through her with terrible efficiency over the following 8 months. In the photograph, Margaret was on Barbara's left and Daniel was on her right, 23 years old, wearing a good shirt, laughing at something his mother had just said. He had his mother's laugh. Margaret had always thought that. She sat with the photograph for a long time. She thought about Barbara, who had trusted Margaret with everything, with her son's college fund, with her estate, with the careful and detailed instructions for how Daniel should receive his inheritance when the time came. She thought about how carefully she had managed all of it. She thought about Barbara's voice, the last time she had heard it, 3 days before the end. You'll look after him, won't you? He tries to manage too much on his own. She had promised. She had kept that promise 4 years. She had been there for every difficulty. She had given freely and without account because that was what you did for family, and that was what Barbara would have done for her. And at some point, she still did not know exactly when, and she suspected she never would. Daniel had looked at everything she had given him and decided it was not enough, or decided it was not enough yet, or decided that the woman who had trusted him completely was also, by virtue of that trust, available. She put the photograph away. She was not grieving him tonight. She would grieve him later. The version of him she had believed in, the version that might have been real once, the version that was Barbara's son and her nephew and the boy with the bicycle. She would grieve all of that properly, in time, the way she grieved everything that deserved it. Tonight she was a financial manager with a case to deliver. Tomorrow she would finish it. She went to bed at 11 and slept without dreaming. Thursday morning, 8:47. Sandra Reyes arrived 13 minutes early, which Margaret had anticipated. People who called themselves detail-oriented always arrived early to meetings they considered important. She was 40-something, practical in her dress, with the alert and slightly guarded expression of someone who had learned to take nothing at face value but was trying to keep an open mind. The forensic accountant she had brought was a slight, quiet man named Paul Huang, who shook Margaret's hand and immediately looked at her desk with the particular longing of someone who wants to get to the numbers. She understood that longing. She had felt it herself for 40 years. The meeting took place in her office with the door closed. Caleb had cleared the hallway. The clubhouse was quieter than she had ever heard it. She put the complete case documentation on the desk. 112 pages, organized into 7 sections, with a one-page executive summary at the front that laid out every conclusion and the evidence supporting each one precisely and without editorial comment. Reyes picked up the summary page and read it. She read it once quickly. Then she read it again slowly. She looked up. "You built this yourself," she said. "Yes," Margaret said. "In how long?" 14 months of preparation. The final synthesis took 23 days. Reyes looked at her with an expression Margaret recognized. It was the same expression Hector had worn that first week. The same expression Darius had worn the first time she answered one of his real questions. The expression of someone revising a significant assumption. "Walk me through the routing number connection," Reyes said. Margaret walked her through it, page by page, number by number, every link in the chain. Paul Huang had a yellow legal pad of his own, and he filled 3 pages of it during the first 20 minutes without looking up. Reyes asked 14 questions. Margaret answered everyone directly, with specific page references and supporting documentation. At 10:45, Reyes sat back in her chair. "The investigation we closed 14 months ago," she said carefully. "The reason it closed was that we couldn't establish a clean money trail. The accounts were layered and the documentation at the source level was incomplete." "I know," Margaret said. "The documentation at the source level was my accounts. And the reason it was incomplete is that Daniel controls access to those records, and he had removed certain documents before you reached them." "You can demonstrate that?" Reyes said. Margaret opened to section 4. "The documents he removed are referenced in prior correspondence but absent from the files. I have copies of the correspondence, my copies, which he didn't know I kept. And I have the transaction records the documents should have supported. The gap is documentable." Paul Huang looked up for the first time. "She's right," he said to Reyes, simply, without ceremony. "This is clean." Reyes looked at him. "How clean?" she said. "Very," he said. He looked at Margaret. "How long did you say you worked in finance?" 40 years, Margaret said. He nodded slowly, like someone improbable. "There's something else," Margaret said. Reyes looked at her. Margaret opened to section 6. "Desert Southwest Solutions was incorporated 11 days after your investigation opened. I believe the incorporation was a direct response to the investigation. Daniel needed a vehicle for moving money that had a legitimate paper trail. He used this organization's contracting invoices as that paper trail. If you pull the bank records for Desert Southwest Solutions, you will find that the total amount billed to contractors in Nevada over the last 22 months is approximately $1.3 million. Of that, roughly $900,000 flows outward to a secondary account structure that I have traced to 4 shell companies registered in Delaware." The room was very quiet. $1.3 million, Reyes said. "That's what I can document from the records available to me," Margaret said. "I believe the actual figure is higher. I only have access to one end of the chain." Reyes looked at the document. Then she looked at Margaret. Then she looked at the document again. Miss Collins, she said, "I have to ask you something directly." "Go ahead," Margaret said. "Why didn't you bring this to us 14 months ago, when you started documenting?" Margaret set her hands flat on the desk. "Because 14 months ago," she said, "I had a suspicion and 12 pages of personal notes. A federal investigator was not going to take a meeting with a 74-year-old woman who showed up with 12 pages of personal notes and said her nephew was stealing from her." She paused. "I needed to build a case that was impossible to dismiss. That took time." Reyes looked at her steadily. "And you chose to build it here." "I chose to build it where I had access to corroborating records and where my competence would be assessed by evidence rather than by appearance," Margaret said. "That combination was not available to me in the usual places." Another silence. Then Reyes said something unexpected. "I'm sorry," she said, "that you had to calculate that." Margaret looked at her. She hadn't expected the apology. She hadn't expected to feel it the way she felt it. Briefly, sharply, in the place where she kept the things she didn't look at directly. Thank you, she said. Now let's talk about what happens next. What happened next, over the following hour, was the transfer of documentation. Page by page, Reyes and Paul Huang went through the complete case file. Paul marked 43 specific items for immediate follow-up. Reyes made 3 of them, stepping out of the office, her voice low and rapid in the hallway. When she came back in from the 3rd call, her expression had changed. We're reopening the investigation, she said, formally, today. Margaret nodded. She had expected this, but hearing it said aloud produced a sensation she hadn't anticipated, a release of pressure she hadn't known she was carrying. Something in her chest that had been held at a certain tension for 14 months simply and quietly let go. I need the originals, Reyes said, the complete file, everything you've built. I have certified copies, Margaret said. I'll retain the originals until the investigation is formally underway, and I've received written confirmation of their receipt and chain of custody. After that, you can have everything. Reyes looked at her. That's, she started. Standard evidence management protocol, Margaret said. I've read your department's guidelines. I'm following them correctly. Paul Huang made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had walked through the door, she smiled. Okay, she said. Certified copies today, originals on formal confirmation. Agreed. They shook hands. At 12:30, Reyes and Paul Huang left the clubhouse. Margaret sat at her desk and looked at the door for a moment after they left, not seeing the door but seeing, in some interior way, the shape of what she had just done. What it meant. What came next. What came next came faster than she expected. At 2:15, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Daniel. She sat very still for 3 full rings. Then she answered. Hello, Daniel, she said. His voice was wrong immediately. Too controlled, too deliberate. The voice of someone who has received information and is managing their reaction. Aunt Margaret, and he said, I heard something today that I wanted to ask you about. What did you hear? She said. Her voice was perfectly even. She had her pencil in her hand. Someone told me, and I'm sure it's not true, that you've been working somewhere, that you've been going somewhere regularly, and that this morning there were people there who had badges. He paused. I just wanted to make sure you were all right, that nobody was taking advantage of you. She noticed that he had not asked where she was working. He already knew. I'm perfectly all right, she said. I've been doing some financial consulting work. It's been very satisfying. Financial consulting, he repeated. Aunt Margaret, you don't need to be doing that. You know You handle the accounts I gave you access to, she said. You don't handle my time. Silence. Who were the people with badges? He said. The control in his voice had thinned slightly. She could hear what was underneath it. Federal investigators, she said. They came to review some documentation I've been putting together. The silence this time was different. It had a quality she had never heard in his voice before, a particular hollowness, like a floor that has been solid for years and has just registered the first crack. What documentation? He said. His voice was very careful now, calibrated in a way that told her he was no longer performing casual concern. He was assessing. Financial records, she said. Routing numbers, account transfers, transaction histories. The kind of documentation I spent 40 years producing. I'm still quite good at it. Another silence. Then his voice changed again. And this was the change she had been waiting for, the one she had been preparing for, the one she knew was coming because she knew him. The shift from careful to aggressive, which was what happened when Daniel Collins felt cornered. Barbara had known it too, though she had always found ways to soften it, to redirect it, to love him around it. Margaret had no interest in doing that. I don't know what you think you've found, he said, but you need to understand that what you're doing is dangerous. You're involving yourself with people who are genuinely dangerous. You're handing documents to federal agencies without understanding what you're looking at, and you're at a stage of life where people make mistakes, Aunt Margaret. They misread things, they draw conclusions. Daniel, she said. He stopped. I want you to listen to me carefully, she said. Her voice was the voice she had used for 40 years in boardrooms, in audit meetings, in difficult conversations with executives who did not want to hear what she was telling them. It was the voice of someone who has the numbers and knows it, I have spent 14 months documenting every transaction that passes through my accounts. I have the routing number for Desert Southwest Solutions matching 11 transfers out of my funds. I have the registration date of that company and its relationship to the timeline of the previous federal investigation. I have 3 years of account activity organized into a cross-referenced document that Paul Huang, who is one of the most respected forensic accountants in the Western District, described this morning as, and I'm quoting him, very clean. She let that sit for a moment. I also have, she continued, the name of the person who referred Desert Southwest Solutions to the organization, whose financial records I've been managing for the past 3 weeks. Do you know whose name that is? Nothing. Complete silence. I'll take that as a yes, she said. Now, the investigation has been formally reopened as of this afternoon. There are 2 paths available to you. The first path is the one where you get good legal counsel immediately and cooperate fully. The second path is the one where you come to wherever you think I am and try to manage this the way you've been managing everything else for 3 years. She paused. I'm telling you clearly, one of those paths gives you a chance. The other one doesn't. I'm telling you this not because I forgive you. I don't. Not yet. Possibly not ever. But because your mother asked me to look after you. And this is the last time I'm going to. The silence lasted 11 seconds. She counted. Then he said in a voice that had lost every layer of performance, "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for 2 years," she said. "I've been certain for 14 months. "Why didn't you?" he started. "Because I needed proof," she said. "Not suspicion, proof. Because I knew that if I came to you without proof, you would do exactly what you've been doing. You'd tell everyone I was confused, that I was old, that I was overwhelmed, and half the people who heard you would believe you." She paused. "I wasn't going to give you that." Another silence. "Where are you?" he said. His voice was very quiet now. "That doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that I'm somewhere safe, and I have copies of everything in multiple locations, and the case is already in federal hands." She paused. "Get a lawyer, Daniel, today. Not tomorrow. Today." She hung up. She sat at her desk and looked at her hands. They were steady. She had known they would be. She had trained herself to steadiness over 40 years of high-stakes moments. The moments where other people looked at you to see whether you were going to hold. And the holding was the whole thing. She was still holding. She picked up her pencil. She wrote 2 words in her legal pad. Call made. She noted the time. She noted the content, briefly, accurately. She added it to the record. Then she heard something she did not expect. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Coming down the hallway toward her office. She looked up. Caleb was in the doorway. Behind him was Rook. Behind Rook was Hector, and beside Hector was Darius. And behind Darius were 6 or 7 other men whose names she knew now, whose faces she had learned, who had become over the course of 23 days a population of people she understood. They were all looking at her. "How did you," she started. "Thin walls," Darius said. She looked at all of them standing in her doorway, and she felt something she had not been prepared for. She had prepared for everything else. The phone call, the documentation, the investigator, the confrontation. She had not prepared for this, for a hallway full of men who had heard her conversation with Daniel Collins and had come, without discussion, without being asked, simply to be present. She did not perform anything. She didn't smile. She didn't reassure anyone. What she did was simpler than that. "He's going to come here," she said. "Not today, but soon. When the lawyer tells him what he's looking at, he'll want to see for himself that things are as far along as they are. He won't be able to stop himself." She looked at Caleb. "I want you to know that when he does, I don't want anyone to threaten him. I don't want anyone to intimidate him. I don't want any trouble that creates complications for this organization." "Understood," Caleb said. "I want him to see," she said, "that I'm here, that I'm fine, that I made this choice and I made it well. That's all I want him to see." "We can do that," Caleb said. She nodded. "Good," she said. "Now could someone make coffee, the real kind? I think I've earned it." There was a sound in the hallway, a release of tension, something that wasn't quite laughter but was related to laughter. The sound a group of people makes when something difficult has passed and they can breathe again. Darius said, "I'll get it." The hallway began to clear, the men moving back toward their regular lives in the way people do when a moment has passed and the day continues. But as they dispersed, Margaret noticed something she filed away carefully, turning it over as she turned over everything she wanted to understand completely. Not one of them had looked at her with pity. Not one of them had looked at her with the particular softened expression that said, "You poor woman," or "How difficult this must be for you," or any of the 100 variations of condescension she had navigated for the past 2 years. They had looked at her the way you look at someone who has just done something that required skill and nerve, and absolute clarity of purpose. They had looked at her the way you look at someone you respect. She had not realized until that moment how long it had been since someone had looked at her that way. She turned back to her desk. She still had work to do. And somewhere in Nevada, Daniel Collins was calling a lawyer, and the circle she had been drawing for 14 months was hours away from closing. She picked up her pencil and worked until the coffee arrived. He came on a Saturday. Margaret knew he would come on a weekend. Daniel had always preferred to handle difficult things on days when the official world was closed, when lawyers were harder to reach, when investigators were unavailable, when the infrastructure of accountability operated at reduced capacity. It was a habit she had observed in him for years without understanding its significance. Now she understood it perfectly. She had been at the clubhouse since 7:30. Not because she expected him that early, she didn't, but because she had learned over 23 days that the early hours were the best hours, the hours when the building was quiet and her mind ran cleanest and the numbers on the page meant exactly what they said. She was on her third cup of coffee and her second legal pad of the morning when Darius appeared in her doorway at 9:47 and said, "There's a car on the road outside, been sitting there for about 8 minutes." She set her pencil down. "What kind of car?" she said. "Silver sedan, rental plates." She looked at him. "Is Caleb here?" "Called him 20 minutes ago when the car first showed up," Darius said. "He's here." She nodded once. She straightened the papers on her desk with 2 precise movements. She checked that the bottom drawer was locked. It was, and the key was where it always was, on the chain around her neck. She picked up her coffee cup and took a deliberate sip. "All right," she said. "You want me to stay?" He said. "I want you to do exactly what you normally do on a Saturday morning," she said. "I don't want anything to look different than it looks on any other day. Can you do that?" He studied her for a moment. "You've been expecting this." "For 3 days," she said. "Go." He went. She sat at her desk and waited. She was not nervous. She recognized the state she was in. It was the same state she had always entered before a significant audit presentation, before a difficult meeting with executives who did not want to hear the numbers. A kind of controlled stillness. The feeling of having done the preparation and knowing the preparation was complete, and now simply waiting for the moment when preparation became action. She heard the gravel in the parking lot at 10:04. She heard the front door of the clubhouse open at 10:07. She heard voices, Caleb's, low and even, and another voice, male, that she would have recognized in any room in any context because it was a voice she had known for 51 years. She heard it moving closer. Then Daniel Collins appeared in the doorway of her office. She had last seen him 6 weeks ago, before she started at the clubhouse. At a lunch he had arranged at a restaurant in Reno, a restaurant he had chosen, at a time he had set, at a table that put her back to the room and him facing the door, details she had noticed and not commented on. He had been solicitous and warm and had ordered for her without asking and had spent 40 minutes explaining, in the patient tone she had come to despise, that her latest bank statement showed some irregularities he was handling and she shouldn't worry. He looked different now. Not dramatically, he was still well-dressed, still polished in the way that had always seemed like confidence, and she now understood was armor. But something in the architecture of his face had changed. There was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. He looked like a man who had not slept well since Thursday afternoon. He looked like a man who had been told what was in the room before he walked into it and still could not quite make himself believe it. He looked at her sitting at her desk, in her cardigan, with her coffee cup and her legal pad and her mechanical pencil, and she watched him recalibrate in real time. She watched him cycle through several responses before he settled on the one he thought would work. He chose warmth. "Aunt Margaret, Sarah," he said. He moved into the room. He sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited, which was different from how Rook had done the same thing. Rook had done it as respect. Daniel did it as ownership. She noted the difference. I've been worried about you. I know, she said. You told me on the phone. This place, he began, gesturing in a way that encompassed the building, is where I work, she said. Yes. Margaret? He leaned forward, putting his forearms on the edge of her desk, which was her desk, and she watched him do it and said nothing. You need to understand what you've done. You've walked into a situation that is genuinely dangerous. These people, whatever you think you know about them, they are not your friends. They are using you. Interesting, she said. What? The word using, she said. I thought about that word a great deal recently. What it means, what it requires. She looked at him steadily. To use someone, you have to know them well enough to understand what they'll accept. You have to use the trust they've placed in you as a mechanism. You have to be willing to look at a person's love for you and decide that it's a resource. She paused. I've been trying to understand when exactly you made that decision, whether it was gradual or whether there was a specific moment. The warmth on his face flickered, just slightly, just enough for her to see the calculation underneath it. I don't know what you think you've found, he said, but a federal investigation is not something to take lightly. If you've given them documents that are inaccurate or incomplete, you could be in serious legal trouble yourself. Could I? She said. Margaret, the documents I gave Sandra Reyes on Thursday, she said, represent 14 months of work organized across 112 pages with a cross-referenced appendix, certified, copies retained, chain of custody documented, and a forensic accountant who described them as very clean within 40 minutes of reviewing them. She picked up her pencil. Tell me specifically which documents you believe are inaccurate. He stared at her. You can't, she said, because they're not inaccurate. You know they're not. That's why you're here. I'm here, he said, and his voice had changed now. The warmth was gone. The performance was being set down like something too heavy to keep carrying. Because you are my family. Because whatever you think happened, there are explanations you don't have, context you're not aware of. The routing number ending in 4471, she said. 11 transfers from my consolidated accounts to Desert Southwest Solutions over 36 months. Total $219,000. Explain that context. Silence. The Delaware shell companies, she said, 4 entities registered over a period of 8 months, each receiving funds from Desert Southwest Solutions in amounts below federal reporting thresholds. Explain that context. More silence. The power of attorney document, she said. Her voice stayed even. She had promised herself it would stay even. That you told me was routine. That I signed without reading because I trusted you. Explain that context. He looked at her across the desk, and she saw it. The thing she had been both dreading and needing to see since she started this. The thing that would confirm the final piece of what she knew. She saw the moment when Daniel Collins stopped calculating and simply looked at her. No performance. No management. No warmth deployed like a tool. Just him. Just the face of someone who had been caught by the last person he expected. I needed the money, he said. It was so simple, so direct. After 3 years of elaborate architecture, the routing numbers, the shell companies, the registered agents, the carefully structured transfers, the exhausting performance of concern, it came down to that one plain sentence. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for denial. She had prepared for legal threats and intimidation and the particular cruelty of someone who decides their best defense is to destroy the credibility of the person they hurt. She had not prepared for I needed the money. She sat with it for a moment. You needed the money, she repeated. The business? It had problems. I had debts. I couldn't. He stopped. He looked at his hands on the edge of her desk. It got out of control. I told myself I'd put it back. I told myself it was temporary. For 3 years, she said, I know. You told yourself it was temporary for 3 years, while you managed my accounts, while you explained my own finances to me in small words, while you told doctors and lawyers and anyone who would listen that I wasn't. She stopped. She recalibrated. She would not let the anger make the words imprecise. You told people I was not competent to manage my own life. Was that temporary too? He looked up. I had to, he said. If you had access to the full accounts, you would have. I would have noticed immediately, she said. Yes, he said nothing. So you removed my access, she said, and then to justify the removed access, you constructed a narrative about my competence. And once that narrative existed, it became useful in other ways. Because a woman who can't manage her own finances can't testify credibly about what happened to them. She looked at him. You didn't just steal from me, Daniel. You tried to erase me, my professional history, my judgment, 40 years of expertise. You tried to make all of it disappear so that what you'd done could disappear with it. I was looking at the desk. Look at me, she said. He looked up. I want you to understand something, she said. Not for legal reasons, not for the investigation, for yourself. She set the pencil down. She folded her hands. Your mother asked me to look after you. I promised her I would. I have kept that promise for 8 years, and I kept it even while I was documenting what you were doing. Because keeping it didn't mean protecting you from consequences. It meant telling you the truth. She paused. The truth is this. You are going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You are going to get honest legal counsel, and you are going to tell them everything. Because the documentation I provided makes everything findable, whether you tell them or not. And cooperation is the only path that gives you any chance of a life afterward. She paused again. And the other truth is this. I am not destroyed. I am sitting at my desk in my office at my job, and I am exactly who I have always been, and nothing you did touched that. I need you to know that because I think you convinced yourself that it did. That the narrative you built about my incompetence was real. It was not real. I need you to know it was not real. Daniel Collins was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of something that has been under pressure for a very long time and has finally, completely let go. I knew it wasn't real, he said. I always knew. Something shifted in the room. Not softness. Margaret was not ready for softness and was not sure she would ever be ready for it in relation to him. But something, the specific gravity of a truth that has finally been said out loud after a long time underground. Then you understand, she said, exactly what you did. He nodded, one small, defeated movement. Get a lawyer, she said, today. Tell them everything. Tell them before they find it themselves. She paused. That's all I have to say to you. I didn't move immediately. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. I know, she said. She picked up her pencil. He understood. He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped once in the doorway. She didn't look up. He left. She heard his footsteps going back down the hallway. She heard the front door. She heard gravel under tires. She heard the sound of the car diminishing down the long road. Then she sat in the quiet of her office, and she did not move for 60 seconds. She counted them, deliberately, the way she had always given difficult feelings a precise and bounded amount of time. On 60, she exhaled. On 61, she picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. The footsteps started again. Different ones. Multiple sets. She heard Caleb first, then Rook, then Darius, then several others, materializing in the hallway outside her door, the way they had done after the phone call on Thursday. Not crowding, not forcing, just present, in the way that people are present when they want someone to know they are not alone. Caleb leaned in the doorway. You all right? He said. Yes, she said. That looked like it was hard. Yes, she said, but you held. She looked at him. I held, she said. He nodded. Something moved across his face, the complicated respect she had seen grow in him over 3 weeks, layer by layer, the way respect actually builds between people who are paying attention to each other. For what it's worth, he said, what you just did took more guts than anything I've seen in a long time. And I've seen a lot. She looked at him steadily. It wasn't guts, she said. It was preparation. Guts is what you need when you haven't prepared. When you've prepared, it's just execution. Rook, who was standing just behind Caleb, made a sound, quiet, private, the sound of someone who has just heard a sentence they intend to remember. Is there anything you need right now? Caleb said. She thought about it genuinely. Yes, she said. I need someone to call Sandra Reyes and let her know that Daniel Collins came here this morning and that our conversation included a verbal admission. I need that logged. And I need, she paused. I need a real lunch today, not a sandwich, something hot. Darius said from somewhere behind Rook. I'll handle both. She turned back to her desk. Thank you, she said. The hallway cleared. She could hear, at the edges of the building, the ordinary sounds of a Saturday resuming. Voices, movement, the distant sound of something mechanical being worked on. The world continuing, the way it does, regardless of what happens at any particular desk in any particular office. She sat with her legal pad. She did not write anything for several minutes. She was thinking about Daniel at 7 years old, asking her why numbers had to be in a certain order. She was thinking about him at 23, laughing at his mother's birthday. She was thinking about the document she had signed, the one he said was routine, the one she had signed because she loved him. She was thinking about all the ways love can be used against you if you let the wrong person hold it. And then she was thinking about something else, about 40 years of work and what it added up to, about the legal pad with its 14 months of notes, about Paul Huang's 43 flagged items and Sandra Reyes's expression when she read the summary page, about Rook and the WD-40, and Darius and the sandwich, and Caleb and the coffee, and the 100 small things that had accumulated over 3 weeks into something she had not expected and did not quite have a word for. She had come here for a specific purpose. She had achieved that purpose. But something else had happened alongside it, something she had not planned and could not have planned, something that had assembled itself out of 43 people's worth of small daily interactions and grown into a shape she was still learning the edges of. She had not expected to belong here. She was beginning to understand that she did. The thought was complicated. She held it carefully, the way she held things she needed to fully understand before she decided what to do with them. She was still holding it when Darius appeared at noon with a plate of actual food, enchiladas, from the diner in town, still hot, with a side of rice she hadn't asked for but immediately wanted. How did you know? She said. You mentioned once that you liked Mexican food, he said. She had mentioned it 3 weeks ago, in passing, in the context of a completely different conversation. He had held it in his memory without being asked and produced it at exactly the right moment. She thought about what she had told him about knowledge being the only thing nobody could take from you. She thought about how that was true but incomplete, because knowledge wasn't the only thing that couldn't be taken. Attention couldn't be taken. The particular care of someone who notices the details, who remembers what you like, who brings the WD-40 before you ask, who shows up in a hallway because they heard something difficult and couldn't stay away, that couldn't be taken either. That, she thought, was what she had found here. Not just a place to work, not just access to financial records, not just the proximity of people who wouldn't dismiss her. She had found people who paid attention. After 40 years of being the one who paid attention to everything and everyone else, she had found people who paid attention back. She ate the enchiladas. They were excellent. She told Darius so. He looked pleased in the particular way of someone who is not used to being told that something they did was excellent and is recalibrating to accommodate the information. Good, he said. He started to leave. Darius, she said. He turned. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. He straightened slightly. Okay. When I leave here, she said, and she watched him register the word when, watched him absorb it without flinching, which she respected. What are you going to do? With your life, I mean, long term. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said, honestly, without deflection. You have a good mind, she said. I've watched you for 3 weeks. You learn fast and you retain what you learn, and you understand systems, financial, social, organizational. You understood how this office worked by watching it for 4 days. That's not common. He looked at her. I never finished school, he said. That's information, not a verdict, she said. I can give you the names of 3 community college programs that specifically support working adults. I can write you a recommendation letter that will say specifically and credibly what I've observed you doing over the last 3 weeks. Whether you use it is up to you, but I want you to know the option exists. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she had overstepped. Then he said, why? Because, she said, someone once paid attention to something I could do before I knew I could do it, and I've spent 40 years trying to return that debt. She picked up her fork. Now go. I want to eat this while it's still warm. He went. She ate. At 2:30, Sandra Reyes called. We've had an interesting morning, Reyes said. Daniel Collins' attorney contacted our office at 11:45. His client wants to discuss cooperation. Margaret set down her fork. Good, she said. The attorney says his client has information about the shell company structure that goes beyond what you documented, Reyes said. Significantly beyond. Margaret was still. How far beyond, she said. We're not sure yet, Reyes said. But Ms. Collins, if what his attorney is suggesting is accurate, this is larger than we thought. The 4 shell companies you identified may be the outer layer of a structure that goes 4 or 5 levels deeper. She thought about this. She thought about 3 years of transfers, carefully calibrated below reporting thresholds. She thought about the 1.3 million she had documented and the figure she had told Reyes she believed was higher. How much higher, she said. Reyes paused. Early estimate, she said carefully, is somewhere between 4 and 7 million. Margaret sat with that number. $4 to $7 million, moved through a structure built specifically to be invisible. Bullet at the foundation of her signature, her accounts, her name, her decades of credibility. A credibility he had then systematically tried to destroy because it was the only thing that could expose him. She thought about the 12 pages of personal notes she had started with. She thought about the yellow legal pad on the kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning. Ms. Collins, Reyes said, are you there? I'm here, Margaret said. When do you expect to have a clearer picture? 72 hours, Reyes said. Maybe less. His attorney is motivated. Keep me informed, Margaret said. Absolutely, Reyes said. And Ms. Collins, I want to say something, off the record. Go ahead. What you built, Reyes said, the case you put together. In the situation you were in, the access you had, the obstacles you were working around, it's one of the most thorough pieces of private documentation I've seen in 14 years of this work. A pause. I want you to know that. Margaret looked at the wall of her office, at the filing cabinet she had reorganized on her first day, at the window that looked out at the parking lot, the ordinary Saturday light coming through it. Thank you, she said. That means a great deal. She hung up. She sat for a moment. $4 to $7 million. She had known it was more than she could document. She had known the 4 shell companies were a visible layer over something deeper. She had built her case from what she had access to, knowing it was the surface, trusting that the surface was enough to open the door. The door was open. What was behind it was larger than she had said out loud to anyone, though she had written the possibility in her private ledger on day 31, in small, careful letters. Scale unknown. Assume larger. She had assumed larger. She had been right. She pulled out the private ledger. She opened it to the last page of entries. She wrote the date and the time in 3 words. Cooperation confirmed. Proceeding. She locked the ledger. She finished her lunch. At 4 o'clock, the clubhouse was at its Saturday afternoon peak. The most people, the most noise, the particular energy of a space that is fully inhabited. Margaret walked from her office to the bar area for the first time since her first day. Not because she needed anything, because she wanted to move through the space, because she wanted to see it as something she understood from the inside rather than assessed from a distance. She stood at the edge of the room. 40-some people, in conversation, in motion. Someone was playing cards. Someone else was arguing about something mechanical, with the passionate specificity of people who care deeply about how things work. The coffee was on, the real kind, and someone had brought food that was not a sandwich, actual food, spread out on the bar, in the informal communal way that she had come to understand was one of this organization's more consistent and underreported qualities. Hector appeared at her elbow. Word got around, he said, about this morning, about Collins coming here. I assumed it would, she said. Everyone wants to know if you're all right, he said. Nobody wants to ask directly because, he paused, choosing his words, because you're you and asking directly might imply you're not all right, and everyone's pretty sure that's not the case. She looked at him. There was something so precisely accurate about that description of the specific way this group of people express care by not expressing it effusively, by assuming competence rather than performing concern, that it struck her as the most concise explanation she'd heard of why she had felt comfortable here from the beginning. Tell everyone I'm fine, she said, and tell them, she paused. What? He said. Tell them thank you, she said. For the last 3 weeks, For the coffee and the chair and the WD-40 and all the rest of it, she looked at the room. I know it wasn't nothing. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said, it wasn't. Good, she said. Now stop looking at me like I'm about to say something memorable. I'm going to get some of whatever that is on the bar, and then I'm going back to finish my work. He almost laughed. Yes, ma'am. She crossed to the bar. She filled a plate. She carried it back to her office. She sat down at her desk. She opened her legal pad to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote final phase underneath it. She drew a line under that. She had gotten her evidence to the investigators. She had survived Daniel's arrival. She had heard the number, 4 to 7 million. And she had not collapsed under the weight of it. She was still at her desk. She was still working. That was, she thought, exactly who she had always been. She picked up her pencil, and she began to write the final accounting. The 72 hours Sandra Reyes had estimated turned into 51. Margaret was at her desk on Monday morning when the call came at 8:17 before she had finished her first cup of coffee. Reyes didn't open with pleasantries. She said, "It's 6.2 million, final number pending full audit, but the core structure is confirmed. Daniel's attorney delivered the complete account map last night. 4 layers of shell companies, 3 states, 2 offshore routing points, and 11 years of activity. Not 3, Margaret. 11. Margaret set her coffee cup down. 11 years. She had been calculating from the point where she first noticed the irregularities, 3 years back. But Reyes was telling her the structure had existed for 11 years, which meant it had started not as a response to crisis, not as something that got out of control, but as something designed, deliberate from the beginning. 11 years ago, Daniel Collins had looked at his aunt and decided, with full clarity of intention, that she was going to be useful to him in a way she would never know about. 11 years ago, he had started building the architecture while she was still working, still at her desk at Consolidated Western, still managing 47 million in annual transactions, still the person everyone came to when the numbers didn't reconcile. He had built it underneath her, using her name, her credibility, her love, while she was in her office doing exactly the work that would have caught him if he had ever let her see the full picture. Margaret, Reyes said, "Are you there?" "I'm here," she said. Her voice was steady. "When you say 11 years of activity, what was the starting point?" 8 months after your sister Barbara's diagnosis, Reyes said quietly. The room went very still. 8 months after Barbara's diagnosis, which meant he had started moving money while his mother was dying, while Margaret was managing Barbara's estate documents, while the family was in the specific, terrible contraction of grief that makes people trust each other more completely because there is no energy left for anything except survival. He had used that. He had used all of it. "Ms. Collins," Reyes said, "I'm sorry. I know It's the truth," Margaret said. "I would rather have the truth." "I know," Reyes said. "I know you would." A pause. "What happens now?" Margaret said. "Formal charges are being prepared," Reyes said. "His cooperation changes the calculus for sentencing, but not for prosecution. You'll be contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office within the week. They want your full documentation certified as evidence, and they want a formal statement." She paused. "And there's something else." "Tell me," Margaret said. "The asset recovery process," Reyes said. "Given the documentation you provided and the account map Daniel's attorney delivered, the recovery team believes they can trace and freeze a significant portion of the funds. Not all of it. Some of it has moved through channels that are going to take time to unwind, but a significant portion, potentially 60 to 70%. Margaret thought about what 60 to 70% of 6.2 million meant in concrete terms. "That's," she said, and then stopped. She was not a person who was easily made speechless by numbers. She had spent 40 years handling numbers that had more zeros than most people would see in a lifetime. But these were her numbers. This was her money, her life savings, her husband's life insurance, the careful accumulation of decades of work, the thing that had been quietly, systematically drained while someone told her she was too old to manage it. "That's substantial," she finished. "Yes," Reyes said, "it is." After she hung up, Margaret sat for 4 minutes without moving, without writing, without calculating. Just sitting. She thought about the kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning, the yellow legal pad, the mechanical pencil, the instant coffee because the real kind was too expensive now. She thought about the moment in the grocery store, 8 months after Daniel took full control of her accounts, when she had stood in the cereal aisle and put back the brand she had bought for 40 years because it was $3 more than the store brand, and she was not sure, she had genuinely not been sure whether she could afford the difference. She thought about what it does to a person to not be sure of that. What it does slowly, over months, to someone who spent 40 years making large financial decisions with complete clarity and confidence. How it hollows something out. How it creates a specific kind of self-doubt that isn't about numbers at all. That is about whether you can trust your own perception of your own life. He had done that to her deliberately. And she had sat in a grocery store aisle holding a box of cereal and put it back. She picked up her pencil. She wrote the number in her private ledger, 6.2 million, 11 years. Then she wrote case complete, recovery proceeding. She underlined it once. She closed the ledger. She unlocked the bottom drawer and took out the complete original case file, all 112 pages, plus the supplementary materials she had added over the final week, now running to 138 pages total. She stacked them with precise practice movements. She put them in the large envelope she had prepared for exactly this moment, sealed it, signed across the seal. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it. It was cold. She didn't care. Caleb appeared in her doorway at 8:45, which meant word had already moved through the building, which meant Darius had likely been listening from the hallway again, which she found she was entirely unable to be irritated about. "Reyes called," she said before he could speak. "I heard," he said. He came in and sat down. He looked at her with the specific directness he had developed with her over a month, not performing concern, not managing her, just looking, paying attention. 6.2. 11 years, she said. He was quiet. "From when Barbara got sick," she said. Caleb closed his eyes for just a moment. 1 second, 2, then he opened them. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, plain and direct, without the architecture of comfort people build around hard truths to make themselves feel better about delivering them. "Thank you," she said, in the same register. Plain and direct. They sat in that for a moment. "What do you need?" he said. "I need to hand the original documents to the U.S. Attorney's Office when they contact me," she said. "I'll do that here if they're willing to come to me, or I'll go to them. Either way." She paused. "And then I need to figure out what comes next." He looked at her. "What comes next for the case?" he said. "Or what comes next for you?" She met his eyes. "Both," she said. He nodded slowly. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way of someone who is choosing what to say carefully. "You know," he said, "when you walked through that door 6 weeks ago, I actually thought you were lost, like you'd taken a wrong turn and ended up somewhere you didn't mean to be." "I know," she said. "And then you opened your mouth," he said, "and I thought, okay, she's not lost, but she's in trouble and she needs something from us. And whatever it is, we'll figure it out, and then she'll go, and that'll be that." "And," she said, "and then you reorganized the filing cabinet," he said, "and fixed 6 months of accounts in a week, and found a federal case in the margins of our vendor records." He paused. "And I stopped thinking about when you were going to leave and started thinking about whether it was too soon to ask you to stay." She looked at him. "That," she said, "is the most indirect job offer I have ever received." He almost smiled. "Is it working?" She looked around her office. The filing cabinet that closed properly now. The window with its ordinary light. The pencils and the legal pad and the ledger on his chain and the chair that didn't wobble. "It's working," she said, "but I want a real contract. With benefits, and I want it in writing before the end of the week." "Done," he said. "And I want the parking spot closest to the door," she said, "permanently." "Already yours," he said. She picked up her pencil. "Then we have a deal," she said. He stood. He moved toward the door. "Caleb," she said. He turned. "When I came here," she said, "I needed a place where I could do what I needed to do without someone deciding in advance that I couldn't do it." She paused. "You gave me that. I want you to know I understand what it cost. The trust it required, given what you didn't know about me. I don't take it lightly." He looked at her for a moment. "You want to know something?" And he said, "I made a decision about you in about 4 minutes. After that, I was just waiting for everyone else to catch up." She looked at him. 4 minutes is generous," she said. I had you in 30 seconds. This time he did smile. A real one. The kind that changed the whole shape of his face. He left. She turned back to her desk and she worked. And the morning moved around her the way mornings had moved around her for 40 years. Organized, purposeful, full of the specific satisfaction of problems that yield to the right approach. The U.S. Attorney's Office called on Wednesday. The attorney who called was named James Whitfield, and he was thorough, formal, and slightly surprised. She could hear it in the precision with which he chose his words, as if he was adjusting his register in real time to someone he had expected to require more managing. He asked if she could come to their offices in Reno on Friday. She said she preferred they come to her. He paused. She gave him the address. He paused again, longer. She waited. He said Friday at 10 worked for him. She said 9. I don't like to lose the morning hours. He said 9. She hung up. She wrote it in her calendar. She went back to work. Thursday evening, Darius knocked on her open door at 6:30, which was later than his usual appearances, and she looked up and recognized immediately that he had something to say that he had been constructing for a while. Sit down, she said. He sat. He looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked up. I've been thinking about what you said, he said. About the community college programs. She set her pencil down. And, she said, I looked up 2 of the names you gave me, he said. One of them has a financial management track. Evening classes, 3 nights a week, he paused. I could keep working here and go to school at the same time. You could, she said. It would take 2.5 years, he said. That's a fixed amount of time, she said. 2.5 years passes regardless of what you do with it. He absorbed that. Would you still write the letter? He said. She opened her desk drawer. She took out an envelope and held it across the desk. He stared at it. You already wrote it. I wrote it last week, she said. I was waiting for you to decide. I took the envelope with both hands, the way you take something you didn't expect and are not quite sure yet what to do with. He held it for a moment. What does it say? He said. That you are one of the most naturally capable people I have observed in a professional setting in 40 years, she said. That you learn by watching and retain what you learn, and that you understand how systems work without being taught the underlying principles explicitly. That any program would be fortunate to have you. She paused. It also says that you make excellent coffee and that your timing with food delivery is unusually accurate. He looked at the envelope for a long moment. I don't know how to thank you, he said. Submit the application, she said. That's how. He nodded. He stood. He was almost at the door when he turned back, and she saw on his face something she recognized from her own life. The expression of a person who has been given something they needed so much that accepting it requires a moment of acknowledgement. You know, he said, when you first walked in here, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen, walking into this place like that. I wasn't brave, she said. I was out of options. No, he said, you had other options. You chose this one. He paused. There's a difference. She looked at him. He was 26 years old and he was right. Go submit the application, she said. He went. Friday morning, 9 o'clock. James Whitfield arrived with 2 colleagues and a court reporter. He was younger in person than he had sounded on the phone. Mid-30s, sharp, with the efficient energy of someone who had prepared carefully and expected to be in and out in 2 hours. He was there for 4. Margaret walked him through every section of the documentation. She answered every question with precision. Twice he asked her to clarify something, and she pulled the supporting pages before he finished the sentence. Because she knew where everything was in 138 pages of material, the way she knew where everything was in any system she had built, completely, from memory, without uncertainty. At one point, around the 2-hour mark, one of his colleagues, a woman who hadn't spoken yet, who had been making notes, looked up and said, Ms. Collins, how long did you work in financial management? 40 years, Margaret said. The woman nodded slowly. She looked back at her notes. It shows, she said quietly. At 11:40, Whitfield set down his pen and looked at her. This is, he said, and then stopped. And she recognized the pause. It was the same pause Paul Huang had made, the same recalibration Sandra Reyes had made, the pause of a professional encountering something that exceeds their expectation in a direction they hadn't prepared for. This is the most complete private evidentiary package I have seen presented in a case of this nature, he said. Possibly in any case I've handled. Margaret picked up her coffee. Thank you, she said. I've had good practice. He looked at her for a moment. I want to be direct with you about the asset recovery timeline. Based on Daniel's cooperation and the account structure, we're looking at a preliminary freeze within 10 business days. Full recovery assessment within 60 to 90 days. The actual return of funds is a longer process, potentially 6 to 9 months depending on the offshore routing complications. I understand, she said. In the meantime, he said, if there are immediate financial concerns, I have a job, she said. He blinked. He looked around her office, the filing cabinet, the locked drawer, the legal pads, the window, and she watched him register fully and for the first time that she was not a victim sitting in a temporary refuge. She was a professional sitting in her office. Right, he said. Of course. At 12:15, he shook her hand, thanked her, gathered his colleagues, and left. Caleb was leaning against the wall in the hallway. How did it go? He said. As expected, she said. That means well. Yes, she said. That means well. She went back to her desk. She worked through lunch without noticing, which was something that happened when she was deep in something that mattered. And she only became aware of the time when Rook appeared at her door at 2 o'clock with a sandwich and a look that said he was going to put it on her desk, whether she asked for it or not. Hector's asking about the Q3 report, he said, setting the sandwich down. Tell him I'll have it Monday, she said. Tell him also that I found 2 more discrepancies in the vendor payment schedule from last quarter that we should discuss before I close the report, so to be available Monday afternoon. Done, Rook said. He paused. You heard the formal charges were filed this morning? She had not heard. She had been with Whitfield when it happened. When? She said. 9:48, he said. I have a contact who monitors the federal docket. Of course you do, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse, abuse of fiduciary duty, he said. 4 counts, each carrying significant penalties. His cooperation agreement reduces the exposure, but it doesn't eliminate it. She sat with that. Wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse. The words had a weight she had prepared for intellectually without fully accounting for emotionally. Hearing them applied to Daniel, to the 7-year-old with the bicycle, to Barbara's son, to the man who had sat across restaurant tables and performed concern while moving her money into shell companies in Delaware. The criminal justice system reduced people to their conduct, to the specific, nameable things they had chosen to do. In some ways, that was brutally unfair. In this case, it was simply accurate. Thank you for telling me, she said. Rook nodded. He was at the door when she said, Rook. He turned. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to be honest. Always, he said. When I came here, she said, and you came to my office that second day, you assessed me. You were deciding whether what I was doing was real, whether I could be trusted. Yes, he said. What made you decide I could, she said. He thought about it for a moment, genuinely thought about it. In the way she had come to understand, he did everything, with a slowness that was not hesitation, but precision. You used my real name, he said, Raymond Castellano. Nobody here uses that name. You'd found it somewhere and you used it deliberately to signal that you did your research, that you saw past the surface. He paused. And then you told me directly that what you were building might lead somewhere uncomfortable, and you were going anyway. He paused again. Most people, when they're scared, perform confidence. You weren't performing, you just were. She looked at him. I was scared, she said. I know, he said. That's how I could tell you weren't performing. He left. She turned back to her desk. She had been scared. She had been scared every day since the first morning she drove to this place and sat in the parking lot running variables. She had been scared when she walked through that door, scared when Caleb asked her why she was really there, scared when she found the first thread, scared when she called Rachis, scared when Daniel walked into her office and sat across her desk, the way he had sat across 100 tables over 50 years and called her Aunt Margaret in that particular tone. She had been scared, and she had worked anyway, because fear had never been the thing that stopped her. The thing that had briefly stopped her, that had kept her at the kitchen table for months before she finally moved, was not fear. It was doubt. The specific, corrosive doubt that Daniel had cultivated in her. that the lawyers and officials had reinforced when they listened to her concerns and spoke to her slowly, that the mirror had whispered when she stood in the grocery store aisle holding a box of cereal, the doubt that maybe he was right, maybe she was too old, maybe her sharp mind was not as sharp as she believed. Maybe the numbers she was reading were misread. Maybe the woman who had run 14-person departments and overseen $47 million annually was now simply someone who didn't see things clearly anymore. That doubt had been the real theft, not the money. The money was recoverable. It was in accounts. It was traceable. It was the kind of concrete thing that courts and forensic accountants and federal investigators could find and return. The doubt was not recoverable in the same way. It didn't come back through legal process. It didn't arrive in a check or a court order or an asset recovery timeline. It came back the way it had left, gradually through accumulation, through 47 mornings of arriving at a desk and doing the work, through Hector's face when a complicated concept became simple, through Darius's coffee and Rook's WD-40 and Caleb's 4-minute decision, and Paul Huang saying very clean within 40 minutes of opening her file. It came back through Sandra Reyes saying, "I'm sorry that you had to calculate that," in the voice of someone who meant it. Through James Whitfield's pause, that particular pause, before he said the most complete private evidentiary package he had ever seen. It came back one interaction at a time, one piece of work at a time, one day at a time. It was almost all the way back. Not because she needed validation. She understood the difference between needing external confirmation and receiving it when it was honestly given. She had not needed them to tell her the work was good. She had known the work was good. She had built it herself with the expertise of 40 years, and she knew what she was looking at. But knowing something in your own mind and having it confirmed by the world are two different experiences, and pretending otherwise was a lie she had no interest in telling herself. The world had confirmed it. She was exactly who she had always been. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in November, Margaret arrived at the clubhouse at 7:30 to find a gathering she had not been told about. Not a gathering in the formal sense. No one had arranged chairs or cleared a space or made any announcement. But when she walked through the front door, the room was full. Not the 40 people of an ordinary morning or even the Saturday afternoon crowd. It was close to 100. Men and women she recognized and some she didn't. People who had driven from other chapters, people she had seen once and people she had seen every day. They were simply there, present. She stopped in the doorway. Caleb was near the center of the room. He was holding something she could see, but not yet read from the distance. "Come in," he said. She came in. The room was the quietest she had ever heard it, not the artificial silence of waiting, but the natural quiet of people who have decided to pay full attention to something. She walked to where Caleb was standing. He held out what he was carrying. It was a vest. Not her cardigan. Not anything she could have anticipated. A leather vest, the kind the men in this room wore, with patches she couldn't fully read at that angle. She took it. She looked at it. She turned it over. On the back, a single patch. Not a chapter designation. Not a rank designation. 3 words in the clean, direct lettering of something that had been made specifically for this purpose. "Margaret, ma'am, ours." She looked at it for a long time. She was aware of the room around her. 100 people holding their breath in the particular way of people who have done something they are not sure will land the way they intended and are waiting to find out. She looked up at Caleb. "I'm not going to wear this to meetings with federal investigators," she said. He exhaled. "Fair. And I want it clearly understood that my job title remains financial manager and that this does not in any way change the organizational reporting structure I've established." "Understood," he said. "Good," she said. She looked at the vest in her hands. She looked at the patch. She looked at the room. "I also want it understood," she said to the room, to all 100 people who were watching her hold this unexpected thing, that when I walked through that door 6 weeks ago, I had a specific purpose, and I was not looking for family. I had the family. I had a nephew who spent 11 years demonstrating exactly what family is capable of doing to you. The room was very still. "But," she said, "I have learned in this room over these weeks that there is a different kind of family, the kind that is not made by blood but by choice, by showing up, by paying attention, by deciding without announcement that someone matters, by bringing coffee and WD-40 and enchiladas and real chairs without being asked, by standing in hallways. She paused. I am not a sentimental person, she said. I am a financial manager with 40 years of professional experience and a very organized filing system. But I am not going to pretend that what has happened here is ordinary. It is not ordinary. And I am not going to pretend that I am the same person who walked through that door, because I am not. I am the same person in every way that matters. I am exactly who I have always been. But I know now, in a way I did not know 6 weeks ago, that being exactly who you are is something that requires other people to reflect back to you. She looked at Caleb. You reflected it back, she said. All of you did. She looked at Darius, who was standing near the back with an expression she recognized. The expression of someone accepting something they needed and were not used to receiving. She looked at Rook, who was near the wall, whose face was still uncomposed and revealed exactly nothing, except that he was paying complete attention, which she had learned was his version of emotion. She looked at Hector, who looked slightly emotional in a way he was clearly trying to manage, and she appreciated the effort. She looked at all of them. Thank you, she said, simply, completely. Then she put the vest over her cardigan. The room broke into noise. Not polite applause, not the formal recognition of an official occasion, but the real sound of people who are genuinely pleased, who have done something right and know it, who are celebrating not a ceremony but a fact. Darius was grinning from the back of the room. Hector was not managing his expression anymore. Rook was almost entirely certain, smiling. And Caleb Walker, who had looked at a 74-year-old woman standing alone in the most intimidating room in Red Valley, Nevada, and decided in 4 minutes that she was exactly what she appeared to be. Caleb was looking at her now with the simple, open expression of a man who knows he made the right call and doesn't need anything from the recognition except the fact of it. She smoothed the vest over her cardigan. She picked up her handbag from the strap on her shoulder. She walked through the room, past 100 people, toward her office. At the door to the hallway, she paused. She turned back. The Q3 report, she said to the room in general, is on Caleb's desk. Hector, we need to talk about the vendor discrepancies this afternoon. Darius, your application deadline is Thursday, and I will know if you haven't submitted it. She paused. The coffee is getting cold. She walked down the hallway to her office. She sat at her desk. She unlocked the bottom drawer. She took out the private ledger, the one that had held for 14 months the careful documentation of everything Daniel had taken from her. She opened it to the last page. She read through the final entries one time all the way to final phase. Recovery proceeding. Then she took out a fresh pen, not the mechanical pencil, but a real pen with real ink. And she wrote on the line below, case closed, Margaret Collins, recovered. She closed the ledger. She put it in the bottom drawer and locked it and put the key on the chain around her neck where it had lived for 6 weeks. And she understood as she did it that she would not need to open that ledger again. The case was closed. The evidence was in federal hands. The charges were filed. The assets were being recovered. The work was done. She opened a fresh legal pad. She wrote today's date at the top. She began to work. Outside her window, the ordinary sounds of the clubhouse continued. Voices, movement, the mechanical world being attended to by people who understood how things were built and how to fix them when they broke. The coffee was on. The morning was full of the particular light of a Nevada November, clean and direct and without pretense. Margaret Collins was 74 years old, and she was at her desk. She had walked through a door that nobody expected her to walk through, and she had done what nobody expected her to do. And she had proven, not to the bikers, not to the federal investigators, not to the nephew who had spent 11 years betting on her silence, but to herself in the place where it permanently lives, that she was exactly who she had spent a lifetime becoming. The numbers on her legal pad meant exactly what they said. Her pencil moved with the precision of 40 years. And the woman who had once stood in a grocery store aisle, wondering if she could afford a box of cereal, sat in her office, in her leather vest and worked, and was not afraid, and was not small, and was not done. She had never been done. She picked up her coffee. It was hot. She drank it. And that was exactly enough.